You're floating on your back in a pool. It's quiet. The sun is warm on your face, the water holds your weight, and for a moment you feel weightless in the good way. The way that makes you understand why people pay thousands of dollars to float in sensory deprivation tanks. Then something shifts. Your body tips forward. You take half a breath and get half water instead. And in the next 60 seconds, your brain begins executing a sequence of decisions that will either save your life or destroy it in a way that is, neurologically speaking, so precise and so specific that it almost seems designed. It is not designed. That's the problem. Here is what nobody tells you about drowning. The movies have it wrong. The safety pamphlets have it wrong. Even most emergency responders are working with a mental model that doesn't match what your brain actually does when it runs out of oxygen underwater. The real story is stranger, more targeted, and in some ways more horrifying than the Hollywood version, because the damage isn't everywhere. It's surgical. And that surgical precision is what traps people inside their own bodies, awake and aware, for years. Let's start at the moment water goes where air is supposed to go. Your larynx slams shut. Not because you told it to. You didn't get a vote. The laryngospasm reflex, a protective mechanism your nervous system inherited from ancestors who needed to not drown, seals your airway in a muscular knot so tight it can briefly prevent water from reaching your lungs at all. This is your body's first attempt at rescue. For a few seconds, you're sealed, which sounds helpful, until you realize you're also sealed away from the oxygen you're burning through at a rate that would embarrass a sports car at full throttle. Your brain accounts for roughly 20% of your body's total oxygen consumption, despite being 2% of your body weight. It is an engine that never idles, and you just cut its fuel line. Within about 15 to 30 seconds, you feel it in your vision first. The edges start to darken and narrow, like someone is slowly pulling a curtain inward from all sides. Your limbs feel heavy and wrong, like they're wrapped in wet concrete. You're not panicking the way you imagined you would. This is the part that surprises people who study drowning. The behavior. Researchers documenting open water submersions have observed something that looks, from the outside, almost peaceful. A high-frequency bobbing, a backward milling of the arms, the head tilting up. No screaming, no thrashing, because your motor cortex is already starting to lose the argument with physics, and screaming requires coordination you no longer have. Congratulations! You've been drowning for 30 seconds and you look like you're having a mild moment of distraction. Now here's the number that should live in your chest like a splinter. At a blood oxygen partial pressure of around 30 millimeters of mercury, a level your body reaches faster than you think when submerged. Your brain loses consciousness in approximately 5 seconds. Not minutes. Not a slow fade. 5 seconds. And within 4 to 6 minutes of that moment, without restored oxygen, the damage stops being theoretical and starts being permanent. That's the window. 4 to 6 minutes to interrupt something that, once it sets in, rewires a person in ways no amount of willpower can undo. But here is where the neuroscience stops being a horror story and becomes something closer to a mystery novel. Because when researchers started imaging the brains of drowning survivors, children, mostly, pulled out and resuscitated, ours but wrong, they expected to find devastation everywhere. Whole hemispheres dark on the MRI, cortex gone. The kind of broad, scorched earth damage that matches what you'd imagine when you think brain without oxygen for 4 minutes. They didn't find that. They found a pinpoint. In a study of 154 children who survived near drowning with neurological damage, a condition researchers have started calling Conrad syndrome, the injury was not diffuse. It was not scattered. It was concentrated in the basal ganglia, a cluster of structures sitting deep in the center of your brain, roughly behind your ears and below your conscious thoughts, responsible for the translation of intention into movement. The cognitive networks were intact. The emotional circuitry was intact. The personality, the memory, the ability to feel love or frustration or boredom, all of it preserved. Only the motor wiring was severed. These children were awake. They were aware. They could feel their parents holding their hands. They just couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't tell anyone that they were in there. One boy, resuscitated 13 years before researchers found him, was assumed to be in a vegetative state. He had been in a facility for over a decade. Then an MRI showed a lesion the size of a pencil eraser in his basal ganglia, and when they tested him, when they asked him to track a light with his eyes, he could. He was locked in a body that had stopped taking instructions, fully present, fully aware. 13 years in a room where everyone around him assumed no one was home. That image should make your skin go cold. Now, why the basal ganglia? Why does oxygen deprivation pick this specific target and spare the cortex directly above it? The honest answer is metabolic vulnerability. The basal ganglia's motor fibers run high-demand, high-frequency signaling pathways that burn through their energy reserves faster than surrounding tissue when the oxygen supply drops. Think of it like a building during a power cut. The servers go down before the emergency lights do. The servers were doing more work. The basal ganglia were doing more work. They're the first to go dark. And here's where it gets stranger. Cold water changes the math entirely. When body temperature drops, and we're talking water below 6 degrees Celsius, brain metabolism falls by 6 to 7% for every single degree of cooling. Below 22 degrees Celsius at the brain level, metabolic demand drops so low that neurons can survive timelines that should, by every warm water rule, be fatal. Children, with their higher surface area to mass ratio, cool faster. This is why some kids pulled from frozen lakes after 20-25 minutes without a heartbeat have walked out of hospitals. The record is 27 minutes submerged. After that, survival with meaningful neurological function drops to nearly zero. But just before that threshold, the cold is not your enemy. The cold is the only reason there's still someone to save. Here's what that means in practice. If someone goes under in cold water, the calculus changes. CPR isn't a formality. It's buying time for a brain that has essentially entered a low-power standby mode, waiting for oxygen to come back before it commits to dying. You don't stop because it's been 10 minutes. You don't stop because it looks hopeless. You don't stop until the water is warm or the hospital says stop. The recovery side. Because this is where medicine is doing something genuinely astonishing, and almost no one outside a handful of reach Diatus Hospitals knows it yet. A toddler was submerged for 15 minutes, no heartbeat when pulled out, resuscitated. 55 days later, still unable to speak or walk, brain imaging showed what they call cerebral atrophy. The tissue itself had started to shrink, like a plant going without water. Standard prognosis: permanent severe impairment. Instead, her doctors started her on normobaric oxygen therapy. 45 minutes, twice a day, breathing concentrated oxygen at normal atmospheric pressure through a mask. Not a dramatic intervention. Not a surgery. A mask and a tank and time. By day 162 of treatment, she was speaking. She was walking. Her follow-up MRI showed the atrophied tissue had grown back. Brain tissue that had been documented as lost had returned to near normal volume. That sentence should not be possible. The mechanism appears to be oxygen acting as a growth signal, flooding hypoxic tissue with enough supply to restart repair processes that had stalled but not fully ceased. The neurons weren't dead. They were in an energy state so low they had stopped functioning, sitting in what researchers sometimes call a state of metabolic dormancy. Like embers. And oxygen was the breath that brought them back. This is why the 4 to 6 minute window is real, but it is not a cliff edge with nothing on the other side. It's a gradient. Every second of oxygen restored is a second of neurons deciding not to finalize their exit. The damage accrues. But so does the recovery, if you move fast and keep moving. What you do in the first 2 minutes after someone goes under, the CPR, the airway, the 911 call, is not a gesture. It's the most important neurological intervention that person will ever receive, delivered by whoever happens to be standing at the edge of the water. You are not a bystander. You are the treatment. The drowning brain doesn't fail all at once. It fails in one precise, devastating location, while leaving everything that makes a person who they are completely, cruelly intact, which means the difference between a locked body and a living life is measured in the seconds before you decided to act.